The Girl in the Golden Cage, a story of hope, healing, and the miracle of never giving up. Part 1, The Girl in the Golden Cage. Sam. There are moments in life when just 1 second is enough to change everything forever. For Rose Winslow, that moment did not arrive with thunder or lightning. It came quietly on a warm Thursday morning in San Diego, when the engine of her mother's Rolls-Royce sputtered and died on Interstate 5, and the GPS guided them to a place they were never meant to find. A rundown garage in a working-class neighborhood, a man with grease-stained hands and grief carved into the lines of his face, and a question no one had ever thought to ask her in over a decade of suffering. But before that question was spoken, before the miracle took its first breath, there was only silence. There was only pain. There was only a 19-year-old girl waking up each morning in a $15 million mansion, staring at legs that had not moved since she was 8 years old. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Rose Winslow's bedroom. Morning light spilled across Italian marble floors, catching the dust motes that floated lazily through the air. The room smelled of salt and money and something else, something heavier, something that no amount of luxury could ever wash away. Guilt. Rose opened her eyes slowly, the way she had opened them every morning for the past 4,015 days. First, she looked at the ceiling, hand-painted, imported from Florence, worth more than most families earned in a decade. Then she looked at the medical equipment beside her bed, the monitors, the emergency call button, the wheelchair waiting faithfully in the corner like a loyal dog that never judged, never complained, never left. And finally, she looked at her legs. They lay beneath the silk sheets like two strangers who had wandered into her life and forgotten how to leave. She could see them, she could touch them, but she could not feel them. Not the warmth of the morning sun falling across her calves, not the weight of the blanket pressing against her thighs, not the cold of the marble floor that she would never again walk across barefoot. More than a decade had passed since the accident, 11 surgeries that promised hope and delivered only scars. 11 summers watching other girls run along the beach while she sat in her chair smiling the smile she had learned to wear like armor. Rose reached for the nightstand and picked up the photograph that lived there. A little girl with sun-bleached hair and a gap-toothed grin standing on a surfboard, arms raised in triumph. Behind her, the Pacific Ocean sparkled like scattered diamonds. That girl was gone now. That girl had drowned in the same waves that broke her spine. Rose set the photograph down and began the ritual she performed every morning. She pulled herself up using the metal bar installed above her bed. She swung her legs over the edge, letting gravity do the work her muscles could not. She reached for the brace that leaned against her nightstand. $180,000 of titanium and engineering. Designed by a team from MIT, manufactured by Ortho Care Solutions, the world's leading orthopedic company. Integrated with artificial intelligence sensors that adjusted pressure according to body movement. On paper, it was a technological miracle. In reality, it was a cage. Rose strapped the brace onto her legs, tightening each buckle with practiced precision. She had done this so many times that her fingers moved automatically, the way a pianist's fingers find the keys without looking. When she was finished, she gripped the bed frame and pulled herself to standing. The pain arrived immediately, a sharp, familiar ache that radiated from her lower back down through her hips. She had learned to hide it years ago, to smile through it, to say the words her mother needed to hear. "I'm fine, Mom. It doesn't hurt. I'm okay." But she was not okay. She had never been okay. And deep in her heart, in that small, quiet place where she kept the truths she could not speak aloud, Rose Winslow had begun to wonder if she ever would be. The hallway stretched before her like a museum corridor. Original paintings lined the walls. A Monet, a Degas, a Picasso sketch her mother had purchased at auction for $3 million. Rose walked past them slowly, each step a negotiation between her body and the metal that imprisoned it. Her right leg moved first. The brace locked at a 15-degree angle, forcing her knee to remain slightly bent. Then her left leg followed and her hip rotated to compensate for the restriction. 20 degrees of unnatural movement repeated with every single step. The doctors called it acceptable mobility. Rose called it survival. She made her way to the breakfast room where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the ocean. The same ocean that had nearly killed her. The same waves that crashed against the shore with indifferent beauty, never apologizing, never explaining, never caring that they had destroyed a little girl's life. Her mother was already seated at the table. Catherine Winslow. Kate to her friends, though she had very few of those. CEO of Bionova Technologies. Pioneer in gene therapy and regenerative medicine. Her name appeared in Forbes on TED Talk stages at international scientific conferences around the world. To the outside world, Kate Winslow was the embodiment of success. To her daughter, she was something else entirely. She was a woman drowning in guilt. Kate looked up as Rose entered, and for just a moment, her composure cracked. The mask slipped, and Rose saw what her mother tried so hard to hide. The flinch, the way her eyes darted to Rose's legs and then quickly away, the slight tightening around her mouth as if she were biting back words she could never bring herself to say. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry I wasn't watching. I'm sorry I was looking at my phone. I'm sorry I chose a $200 million deal over my daughter's life. But Kate never said those words. Instead, she smiled the same bright, brittle smile she had worn since the accident. Good morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep? Rose lowered herself carefully into the chair across from her mother. The movement sent another spike of pain through her lower back, but she had learned to keep her face perfectly still. Fine, I slept fine. They ate breakfast in silence. Fresh fruit from the estate garden. Organic eggs prepared by their private chef. Coffee imported from a small village in Colombia where the beans were hand-selected and roasted over open flame. Everything was perfect. Everything was beautiful. Everything was exactly what money could buy, and none of it mattered. After breakfast, Rose wheeled herself to the physical therapy room on the east wing of the mansion. Her therapist, a cheerful woman named Margaret, was already waiting. The room was filled with equipment that cost more than most people's homes. Parallel bars, resistance machines, hydrotherapy pools, every tool that modern medicine could offer. Every tool except hope. Let's try the walking bars today, Margaret said with professional enthusiasm. I think you're ready to increase your distance. Rose nodded and allowed herself to be helped onto her feet. She gripped the parallel bars, her knuckles turning white, and began to walk. Step, pain, step, pain, step. Each movement was a battle. Each inch of progress was paid for in suffering. And no matter how hard she tried, no matter how many thousands of dollars her mother spent on the latest treatments and the most advanced equipment, the pain never went away. It had been this way since the accident. Rose had stopped, believing it would ever change. Wonderful, Margaret said as Rose reached the end of the bars. That was your best session yet. Rose smiled the smile she had perfected over a decade of pretending. Thank you. I'll try harder tomorrow. But as Margaret helped her back into the wheelchair, Rose caught her own reflection in the mirrored wall. A 19-year-old girl with her mother's cheekbones and her father's eyes. A face that was technically beautiful, but somehow hollow. Empty. Like a mansion with all the furniture in place but no one living inside. She looked away quickly, but not before she saw the truth that her smile could not hide. She was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of hoping. Tired of waking up every morning in a golden cage surrounded by everything money could buy and nothing that could set her free. That afternoon, Kate announced that they had an appointment in La Jolla, a new specialist, a new treatment, a new hope that would almost certainly end in the same disappointment as all the others. Rose wanted to say no. She wanted to tell her mother that she was done chasing miracles, done being a project, done being the broken thing that Kate kept trying to fix with money and guilt and desperate optimism. But she looked at her mother's face and saw the hope shining there, fragile and fierce, and she could not bring herself to destroy it. Okay, Rose said quietly, let's go. The Rolls-Royce glided through the streets of La Jolla like a ghost from another world. Through the tinted windows, Rose watched the ordinary people living their ordinary lives. A father pushing his daughter on a swing, a group of teenagers running toward the beach with surfboards under their arms. An elderly couple walking hand in hand along the sidewalk, their steps slow but steady. None of them knew how lucky they were. None of them understood that the simple act of walking was a gift that could be stolen in a single moment. Rose pressed her forehead against the cool glass and closed her eyes. Behind her eyelids, memories waited like sharks in dark water. She was 8 years old again. The sunset painted Pacific Beach in shades of orange and gold. The waves rolled in with rhythmic patience, and Rose stood on her surfboard, arms raised in triumph, feeling like the luckiest girl in the world. Mom, look at me. Her voice carried across the water, filled with joy and pride, and the absolute certainty that this moment would last forever. On the shore, her mother sat on a beach towel, phone in hand, typing furiously. An email. A deal. $200 million hanging in the balance. I see you, sweetheart. Be careful. But she had not seen. She had not looked up. She had not noticed the wave building behind her daughter, larger than the others, darker, more powerful. Mom, look, I'm doing it. I'm really doing it. The wave hit before Rose could react. One moment she was flying triumphant, invincible. The next moment she was underwater, tumbling through darkness, her surfboard slamming into her head with a sickening crack. The pain was immediate and absolute, a lightning bolt that shot from her skull down through her spine and then simply stopped. Everything below her chest went silent, numb, dead. She tried to swim. Her arms thrashed frantically, but her legs would not move. They hung below her like anchors, dragging her down into the cold Pacific darkness. Rose opened her mouth to scream, and the ocean poured in. The surgery lasted 14 hours. When Rose woke up, she was in a hospital bed surrounded by machines that beeped and whirred and measured the small life she had left. Her mother sat beside her, mascara streaked down her face, gripping Rose's hand so tightly it should have hurt. But Rose could not feel it. She could not feel anything below her chest. She looked down at her legs lying motionless beneath the hospital blanket and tried to move her toes. Nothing. She tried to bend her knee. Nothing. She tried to kick, to twist, to do anything at all that would prove the doctors were wrong. Nothing. Mom Rose's voice was small and frightened and very far away. Why can't I feel my legs? Kate Winslow broke. Right there beside her daughter's hospital bed, the most powerful woman in biotechnology shattered into 1,000 pieces. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry, sweetheart. I should have been watching. I should have been paying attention. This is my fault. This is all my fault. And Rose, 8 years old, paralyzed from the chest down, with her entire future erased in a single moment of maternal distraction, had to comfort her mother. It's okay, Mom. It's not your fault. I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. But even then, lying in that hospital bed with her legs already beginning to atrophy, Rose understood something that would haunt her for the years to come. Her mother would never stop blaming herself, and Rose would never stop carrying the weight of that guilt. The Rolls-Royce jolted suddenly, pulling Rose from her memories. A strange sound came from the engine. A cough, a sputter, then silence. Kate frowned and tried the ignition. Nothing. What's happening? Rose asked. I don't know. The engine just died. The GPS unit mounted on the dashboard flickered to life. Recalculating route. Nearest service location, Mercer's garage, 0.3 miles. Kate sighed heavily. Of course this happens today. She guided the dead car to the side of the road and called for their driver to bring another vehicle. But the nearest car was 45 minutes away, and the afternoon sun was beginning to bake the interior of the Rolls-Royce. We'll have to wait at the garage, Kate said, clearly unhappy about the prospect. It's too hot to stay in the car. They got out and began walking toward the address the GPS had provided. Rose moved slowly, each step sending familiar pain through her body, but she said nothing. She had learned long ago that complaining only made things worse. The neighborhood changed as they walked. The mansions and manicured lawns of La Jolla gave way to industrial buildings and cracked sidewalks. The smell of money faded, replaced by the scent of motor oil and salt air and honest work. And then they arrived, Mercer's garage. It was a small building wedged between an aging warehouse and an auto parts store. The concrete walls were cracked and stained. The roll-up door was half open, revealing a cluttered interior filled with tools and spare parts and the accumulated debris of decades. It was the opposite of everything Rose had ever known, and something about it felt strangely honest. A man emerged from the garage, wiping his hands on a rag that had seen better days. He was in his late 30s with calloused hands and tired eyes and the kind of face that had been weathered by loss. His clothes were stained with grease, and his shoulders carried the weight of 1,000 sleepless nights. But when he looked at Rose, his eyes were kind. Can I help you? Kate stepped forward, her voice polite but distant. Our car broke down, the engine overheated. Could you take a look? The man nodded. Of course, bring it over and I'll see what I can do. While Kate directed the tow truck that would bring the Rolls-Royce to the garage, Rose looked around for a place to sit. Her legs were aching, and the walk had exhausted her more than she wanted to admit. There was an old wooden bench in front of the garage. She made her way toward it slowly, each step a reminder of everything she had lost. Sitting down was its own ordeal. The rigid braces made it nearly impossible to bend naturally. Rose had to twist her body awkwardly, using her arms to lower herself while her legs remained locked in their metal prison. Finally, she found a position that hurt a little less than the others. She exhaled slowly and closed her eyes, trying to block out the pain. But when she opened them again, she realized the mechanic was watching her. His name was Garrett Mercer. Gary to his friends. He owned this garage, had inherited it from his father, and had spent the last 15 years keeping it running on a combination of skill and stubbornness. He was also a single father. Rose had noticed the little girl playing in the corner of the garage. 7 years old, maybe 8, with curly brown hair and serious eyes. She was drawing pictures on sheets of paper surrounded by crayons and scraps of metal, and the kind of creative chaos that only a child could produce. But Rose's attention kept returning to Gary. He was checking her mother's Rolls-Royce, his head bent over the open hood, his hands moving with practiced confidence. But every few minutes, he would glance toward the bench where Rose sat, not staring, not gawking the way most people did when they saw her braces, just looking, observing, noticing. It made Rose uncomfortable. She was used to being invisible, used to people looking through her, past her, anywhere but directly at her. The wheelchair and the braces made others uneasy, and most people dealt with that discomfort by pretending she did not exist. But this man was different. He saw her, and for reasons Rose did not understand, that terrified her. 15 minutes passed. Gary finished his inspection and walked over to where Kate stood, explaining the problem in simple terms that even a billionaire could understand. Water pump failure, common in high-performance vehicles. He could have it fixed in a few hours. Kate nodded impatiently and glanced at her phone. She had already made 3 calls and sent a dozen emails since they arrived. Even now, standing in a rundown garage in a working-class neighborhood, she could not stop working. Rose watched her mother and felt the familiar mixture of love and resentment that had defined their relationship since the accident. Kate Winslow had spent millions trying to fix her daughter, but she had never once stopped long enough to actually see her. Gary walked toward Rose. She tensed immediately, bracing herself for the usual awkward conversation. The sympathetic tilt of the head, the too bright smile, the careful avoidance of any mention of her condition. But instead, Gary knelt down in front of her, not looking down at her the way most people did, meeting her eyes at the same level, treating her like an equal. And then he asked the question that would change everything. "Excuse me, I don't mean any disrespect, but your brace, could it be too tight?" Rose blinked. In all those years, through 11 surgeries, through dozens of specialists and therapists and world-renowned experts, no one had ever asked her that question. "What, your brace?" Gary repeated gently. "I noticed you keep shifting your weight, trying to find a comfortable position, and when you walked over here, your hip was rotating about 20 degrees more than it should." Rose stared at him. "How could you possibly know that?" Gary shrugged. "I'm a mechanic. I spend my life looking at machines, figuring out why they don't work properly. And the human body, it's just another machine. More complicated, sure, more beautiful. But the same basic principles apply." He paused. "Something about your brace isn't right. The way you're moving, the way you're compensating. It's not your body that's failing. It's the device that's supposed to be helping you." Kate had finished her phone call and was walking toward them, her heels clicking against the cracked concrete. "What's going on here?" Gary stood up respectfully. "Mrs. Winslow, I was just telling your daughter that I think there might be an issue with her brace." Kate's expression hardened. That brace was designed by the best orthopedic engineers at MIT. It cost $180,000. It has AI sensors and adaptive pressure systems. "Are you suggesting that a garage mechanic knows more than the world's leading experts?" Gary did not flinch. "I'm not suggesting anything, ma'am. I'm just saying what I observed. May I take a closer look?" "Absolutely not." Kate's voice was sharp. "We're done here. Call me when the car's ready." She turned to leave, and Rose knew she should follow. Should stand up and walk away and forget this strange man who asked strange questions. But she couldn't. Wait, Rose said. Her mother stopped. Rose, we need to go. No. Rose's voice was quiet but firm. I want to hear what he has to say. Kate stared at her daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Rose met her mother's gaze without looking away. For over a decade, she had been the perfect patient, the grateful daughter, the project that needed fixing. But something about this moment, something about this ordinary man with his grease-stained hands and his observant eyes, made her want to stop being passive, made her want to fight. Please, Mom, just let him look. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Kate nodded. Gary knelt down again and asked for Rose's permission before touching the brace. His hands traced along the metal joints, checking angles, testing flexibility. His eyes narrowed with concentration. This knee joint, he said slowly, it's fixed at 15 degrees. Yes, Rose said, that's how it was designed. Gary shook his head. But when you walk naturally, your knee needs a range from 0 to 70 degrees. Because this joint is locked every step you take, your knee can't bend properly. Your hip is forced to rotate about 20 degrees to compensate. He looked up at Rose. That's why you have chronic lower back pain. Right? Rose felt the blood drain from her face. How do you know my back hurts? Gary gestured to her posture. You're leaning 7 degrees to the right. Your spine is adjusting to reduce pressure on your lower vertebrae. It's a compensation pattern. Your body is trying to protect itself from the pain the brace is causing. Tears spilled down Rose's cheeks before she could stop them. All these years, she whispered. All these years I've been in pain. The doctors said it was a normal side effect of my condition. They said I had to accept it. They said there was nothing else they could do. Gary's voice was gentle. They designed this brace for technology, for sensors, for appearance, but they forgot the most basic thing. He looked into her eyes. They forgot how the human body actually moves. Rose sat in silence, tears streaming down her face, processing what she had just heard. For more than 10 years, she had believed that her pain was inevitable, a consequence of her injury, a price she had to pay for surviving. She had accepted it the way she had accepted the wheelchair and the braces and the endless rounds of treatment that never seemed to help. But now this stranger, this mechanic with no medical degree, was telling her something different. He was telling her that the pain was not her fault, that her body was not broken, that the device meant to help her had been hurting her all along. Rose looked at her mother. Kate stood frozen, her face pale, her composure finally cracking under the weight of this revelation. $180,000. Years of faith in experts and engineers and the best medical minds in the world. And they had all missed what a garage mechanic saw in 15 minutes. Rose turned back to Gary. Can you fix it? The question hung in the air like a prayer. Gary was silent for a long moment. His eyes moved to the cluttered garage behind him, to the old tools and the cracked concrete and the photographs on the wall. Rose followed his gaze and saw a picture of a young man with a bright smile and laughing eyes. Something about the image made Gary's face tighten with grief. I don't know, he said finally. I'm not a doctor. I don't have a medical degree or fancy equipment or a team of engineers. Then why should I trust you? Rose asked. Gary looked at her, and in his eyes, Rose saw something she recognized, something she understood, something that connected them across the vast divide of wealth and circumstance that should have made them strangers. Pain. This man knew what it meant to suffer. Because I made a promise, Gary said quietly, a long time ago to someone I loved. I promised that if I ever got the chance, I would help people like you. People who need hope, he paused. I can't promise I'll succeed, but I can promise I'll try. That night in the oceanfront mansion, Rose could not sleep. She stood at her window looking out at the Pacific Ocean. The same waves that had broken her spine rolled endlessly against the shore, silver under the moonlight, beautiful and terrible, and utterly indifferent. A knock at her door. Kate entered, her eyes red from crying. Rose, we need to talk about what happened today. Rose turned to face her mother. Okay, talk. Kate took a deep breath. That man, that mechanic, he could be wrong. He could make things worse. I can't bear to see you hurt again. Rose nodded slowly. I know. I've spent years trying to fix this. Kate continued, her voice breaking. I've spent millions of dollars. I've brought in the best doctors, the best engineers, the best of everything. And none of it has worked. I know, Rose said again. So why, Kate asked desperately, why do you want to trust a stranger? Rose was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke, and her words changed everything. Because for all these years, you've been trying to buy me a miracle. Clinics, surgeries, equipment. You throw money at the problem because you feel guilty about the night of the accident. Kate flinched. But miracles can't be bought, Mom. Rose's voice was calm but firm. And I don't need you to buy anything else. I just need you to believe in me. Tears streamed down Kate's face. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for that night. I should have been watching. I should have seen you. Rose crossed the room and took her mother's hands. The accident was caused by the ocean, not by you. Stop punishing yourself. Stop trying to fix me with money and guilt. Just let me try this. Let me make my own choice. Kate looked at her daughter, really looked at her perhaps for the first time since the accident. And in that moment, she saw not a broken girl who needed saving, but a young woman who was ready to save herself. The next morning, Rose Winslow picked up her phone and dialed the number on the business card Gary had given her. He answered on the third ring. Mr. Mercer, this is Rose Winslow. I want to try. When can we start? There was a pause, then Gary's voice came through, steady and calm. Come to the garage tomorrow morning. We'll begin. Rose hung up the phone and looked out at the ocean. For the first time in over a decade, she felt something stirring in her chest, something small and fragile and easily broken. Hope. Part 2, The Journey Through Hell. The garage smelled of motor oil and old memories. Rose Winslow stood in the doorway, her eyes adjusting to the dim light, taking in the cluttered workspace that looked nothing like the sterile medical facilities she had known for so long. No gleaming equipment, no white walls, no team of specialists in press coats consulting clipboards and speaking in hushed professional tones. Just a single man with calloused hands, a workbench covered in tools, and a promise made to someone who was no longer alive. Gary Mercer looked up from his work and nodded. You came. I said I would. Rose moved into the garage slowly, each step a negotiation with the metal cage strapped to her legs. Behind her, Kate remained in the Rolls-Royce, watching through the tinted windows. She had agreed to let Rose try, but she could not bring herself to enter. Could not bring herself to place her daughter's fate in the hands of a stranger. That was fine. Rose understood. Some battles had to be fought alone. That's on. The little girl was there again. She sat cross-legged on the concrete floor, surrounded by sheets of paper covered in drawings, airplanes with crooked wings, gears and machines that existed only in a child's imagination. She looked up as Rose entered and offered a shy smile. You're the lady with the metal legs. Rose blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. Yes, I suppose I am. I'm Penny. The girl set down her crayon. My dad's going to help you walk better. He's really smart. Rose looked at Gary, who was already clearing space on his workbench. Is that true? Are you really smart? Gary shrugged without turning around. Smart enough to know when something's broken. Smart enough to want to fix it. He gestured to an old chair beside the workbench. Sit, let me take a proper look at that brace. Sure. The examination took nearly an hour. Gary moved with methodical patience, measuring angles, testing joints, making notes in a battered notebook that had seen years of use. He asked Rose questions no doctor had ever thought to ask. How does it feel when you shift your weight forward? Where exactly does the pain start? What happens when you try to bend at the waist? Rose answered as honestly as she could, describing sensations she had learned to ignore, pains she had convinced herself were normal. With each answer, Gary's frown deepened. Finally, he set down his notebook and looked at her. The design is fundamentally flawed. The weight distribution, the joint angles, the pressure points. They built this brace to look impressive on paper, but they never actually watched someone use it. Rose felt something tighten in her chest. So what do we do? Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he walked to the wall where the photographs hung. Rose had noticed them before. Pictures of a young man with laughing eyes and an easy smile. The same face appeared in image after image, growing from a boy to a teenager to a young adult. In every photograph, he looked happy. In every photograph, he looked alive. His name was Ethan. Gary spoke the name like a prayer, like a wound that had never quite healed. My younger brother. 5 years younger than me, the smart one in the family. He was in his final year of aerospace engineering at UC San Diego when it happened. Rose watched Gary's face as he spoke. The grief was there, carved into every line, present in every shadow. What happened? Scuba diving accident. La Jolla Cove. He dove too deep, hit some submerged rocks, damaged his spine. Gary's voice grew distant, as if he were speaking from somewhere very far away. T6 spinal cord injury, paralysis from the chest down. The doctor said he would never walk again. Rose felt her breath catch. Like me. Like you. Gary turned to face her, and in his eyes, Rose saw something she recognized. Something she understood. The particular kind of pain that came from watching someone you love suffer, from being unable to help, from carrying the weight of powerlessness like a stone in your chest. There was an experimental surgery. It could have given him a chance to walk again, but it cost $350,000. Rose waited. I tried everything. Gary's voice cracked. I worked 3 jobs. I borrowed money from everyone I knew. I begged. I sold everything that wasn't nailed down. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. He paused. Ethan told me to stop. Told me he was fine. Told me to take care of Penny instead. Rose looked at the little girl still drawing on the floor. She's your daughter. My wife died giving birth to her. Gary's words were flat, hollow. Complications. There was nothing the doctors could do. So I was alone. A newborn baby, a brother who couldn't walk, and debt I could never repay. The garage fell silent. Rose understood now. Understood why Gary had looked at her with such intensity at their first meeting. Understood why he had noticed what no one else had seen. She reminded him of Ethan. What happened to your brother? Gary's jaw tightened. 5 years after the accident, he got pneumonia. His lungs had been weakened by years of lying in bed, and his body couldn't fight it off. He walked to the workbench and picked up a worn photograph. A hospital room. Gary holding his brother's hand. Ethan thin and pale but still smiling, still trying to make everyone else feel better. The last thing he said to me was a promise. Gary's voice was barely above a whisper. He made me promise that if I ever got the chance, I would help people like him. People who needed hope. People who the system had given up on. He set the photograph down gently. I've been waiting 15 years to keep that promise. Rose looked at the man before her, a mechanic with no medical degree, a single father living in a rundown garage, a brother carrying grief like a second skin. And yet he had seen what MIT engineers had missed. He had noticed her pain when world-renowned specialists had overlooked it. He had offered hope when everyone else had offered only resignation. Why me? Rose asked. Why did you decide to help me? Gary met her eyes. Because when I looked at you sitting on that bench, shifting and adjusting and trying to hide how much you hurt, I saw Ethan. I saw every person who's been told to accept their fate, who's been given expensive equipment that doesn't work and told to be grateful for it. He paused. You deserve better. Everyone deserves better. The first prototype took Gary 72 hours to build. He worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and memories of his brother. Rose came to the garage each day, watching him measure and cut and shape the metal with hands that seemed to know instinctively what the human body needed. Penny stayed close to her father, bringing him sandwiches he forgot to eat and cups of water he forgot to drink. She had learned long ago that when her father was working on something important, the rest of the world ceased to exist. Once late at night, Rose arrived at the garage and found Gary asleep at his workbench. His face was pressed against a stack of blueprints, his hand still clutching a pencil. In sleep, he looked younger somehow, more vulnerable. The grief lines softened, the weight of responsibility lifted. Rose covered him with a blanket she found in the corner and sat down to wait. When he woke an hour later, she was still there. You didn't have to stay, he said groggily. I know, Rose smiled, but I wanted to. On the 4th day, the prototype was ready. It looked nothing like Rose's original brace. Lighter, simpler. The joints were positioned differently, and the straps were designed to distribute pressure across her body rather than concentrating it in specific points. Gary held it up for inspection. It's not perfect, it's just a first attempt, but I think it will hurt less than what you have now. Rose looked at the device, at the hours of work and hope and grief that had gone into its creation. Let's try it. Kate had arrived that morning, unable to stay away. She stood in the corner of the garage, arms crossed, face tight with worry. Every instinct told her to stop this, to take her daughter back to the safety of their mansion and the security of approved medical treatments. But Rose had asked her to trust, and for the first time in years, Kate was trying. Gary knelt before Rose and began removing her old brace. The process was slow and careful, each buckle unfastened with gentle precision. When the metal finally came away from her legs, Rose felt a strange lightness, as if she had been carrying chains she had forgotten she was wearing. The new brace went on. It was lighter. Rose felt the difference immediately. The pressure was distributed more evenly, and the joints seemed to move more naturally with her body. "How does it feel?" Gary asked. "Different." Rose took a breath. "Better, I think." Gary stood and stepped back. "Okay, try to stand." Rose gripped the edge of the workbench and pulled herself upright. The familiar pain shot through her lower back, but it was duller somehow, less sharp, more bearable. She let go of the workbench and stood on her own. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. She was standing. "I'm going to try to walk," Rose said. Gary nodded. "Take your time, there's no rush." Rose shifted her weight to her right leg. The new brace responded smoothly, allowing her knee to bend in ways the old one never had. She moved her left leg forward. 1 step. No pain. 2 steps. Still no pain. 3 steps. The scream tore from Rose's throat before she knew it was coming. She crashed to the concrete floor, her body twisting as she fell. Blood began pooling around her ankle where a metal joint had cut deep into her skin. The pain was blinding, overwhelming, worse than anything she had felt in years. Rose Kate ran forward and dropped to her knees beside her daughter. "Oh God. Oh God, no." Gary stood frozen, his face had gone white. "I'm sorry." His voice was hollow. "I'm so sorry. I must have miscalculated the ankle joint. I didn't account for—" "Get away from her," Kate screamed. "Haven't you done enough? I should never have trusted you. I should never have let her come here." She pulled Rose into her arms, cradling her daughter against her chest. Rose could feel her mother's heart pounding, could feel the panic radiating from her body. "We're leaving," Kate said. "We're leaving right now, and we're never coming back." She helped Rose to her feet, supporting most of her weight. Rose hobbled toward the door, blood dripping from her ankle pain, screaming through her body. But at the doorway, she stopped. She turned back and looked at Gary. He stood in the middle of the garage, surrounded by his tools and his blueprints and his broken hopes. His hands hung at his sides. His eyes were fixed on the blood staining the concrete floor. He looked exactly the way Rose imagined he had looked when Ethan died. Destroyed. "Don't give up." The words came out before Rose could stop them. Kate stared at her. What Rose kept her eyes on Gary. "Don't give up on me. This was one attempt, one failure. It doesn't mean we're done." "Rose, you're bleeding." Kate's voice was desperate. "You could have been seriously hurt." "I was already seriously hurt, Mom." Rose's voice was calm, despite the pain. "I've been seriously hurt since I was 8 years old. What's one more fall?" She looked at Gary. "I'll be back tomorrow." That night, Rose sat in her bathroom while a private nurse cleaned and bandaged her ankle. The cut was deep, but not dangerous. A few stitches, some antibiotics, a warning to stay off her feet for a few days. Rose barely heard any of it. Her mind was elsewhere, back in the garage, back with the man who had tried to help her and failed. She thought about Ethan, about the surgery that could have saved him, about the $350,000 that Gary could never raise. She thought about the promise Gary had made to his dying brother, and she thought about what it meant to truly not give up. At midnight, Rose picked up her phone and typed a message. "Mr. Mercer, this is Rose. I'm sorry about my mom today." She was scared. We both were. "But I'm okay. The cut will heal. Please don't give up on me. I believe in you." She stared at the words for a long moment. Then she added one more line. "And I believe in myself." She hit send. Done. The next morning, against her mother's protests, against the advice of her nurse, against every instinct that told her to stay safe in her golden cage, Rose Winslow returned to the garage. Gary was there. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the redness of his eyes, in the trembling of his hands, in the way he looked at her as if he couldn't believe she was real. "You came back. I told you I would." Rose sat down in the chair beside his workbench. "Show me what went wrong. I want to understand." They spent the entire day reviewing the failure. Gary walked her through every calculation, every measurement, every assumption he had made. Rose listened carefully, asking questions, trying to understand the mechanics of her own body in a way she never had before. The problem, Gary explained, was the ankle joint. I designed it to flex at 15 degrees, but your body needed more range to compensate for the way your knee was moving. When the joint hit its limit, it locked up and cut into your skin. So we need more flexibility in the ankle. Yes, but that creates other problems. More flexibility means less stability. We have to find the right balance. Rose nodded slowly. Then let's find it. She began researching it on her own. Every night after returning from the garage, Rose sat at her computer and read everything she could find about biomechanics. Medical journals, engineering papers, YouTube videos created by physical therapists and rehabilitation specialists. For over a decade, she had been a passive recipient of treatment. Doctors told her what to do and she did it. Specialists designed equipment and she wore it. Therapists created exercise programs and she followed them. But she had never tried to understand her own body. She had never asked why. Now she asked constantly. Why did her hip rotate when she walked? Why did her back hurt more on some days than others? Why did certain movements feel natural while others felt forced and painful? She kept a notebook recording observations about her own movement patterns. The way her weight shifted when she stood up. The angle of her spine when she sat down. The exact moment when pain began and the exact moment when it faded. She was no longer a patient waiting to be fixed. She was a partner in her own healing. The second prototype took 2 weeks to build. Gary incorporated everything they had learned from the first failure. The ankle joint was redesigned with greater flexibility. The knee mechanism was adjusted to allow a wider range of motion. Medical-grade silicone was added at every contact point to prevent the metal from cutting into Rose's skin. This time, Kate insisted on bringing a medical professional to observe. Dr. Harold Pemberton was California's leading orthopedic specialist. He had followed Rose's case since the beginning, had performed 3 of her surgeries, had signed off on the original brace that had caused her so much pain. He arrived at the garage with obvious skepticism. "Mrs. Winslow," he said, pulling Kate aside, "I understand your desire to help your daughter, but this man has no medical credentials, no engineering degree. This entire enterprise is highly irregular." Kate nodded. "I know, but Rose wants to try." Pemberton looked at the young woman sitting in the garage, her eyes bright with hope, her body leaning forward with anticipation. "Very well," he said, "but I reserve the right to stop this at any time if I believe she's in danger." The second attempt began the same way as the first. Gary knelt before Rose and carefully removed her brace. The new prototype went on. Rose flexed her legs experimentally, testing the joints, feeling the way the metal moved with her body. "It feels better," she said. "More natural." Gary nodded. "Take your time, whenever you're ready." Rose stood. The first step was easier than before. The ankle flexed smoothly and her knee bent at a natural angle. She felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest. The second step was even better. The third step. The fourth step. Rose was walking, actually walking without the grinding pain that had accompanied every movement for so long. "I'm doing it," she whispered. "I'm actually doing it." And then the hip joint shifted. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. Rose felt her pelvis twist as the metal pressed into bone. She screamed and collapsed, her body crumpling to the concrete floor. This time the pain was worse than before. Much worse. Like fire spreading through her lower body, like knives being driven into her spine. "No," Kate screamed, rushing forward. "No, no, no, duh." Pemberton was already on his knees beside Rose, checking her vital signs, assessing the damage. "The hip mechanism is pressing against her pelvis," he said grimly. "We need to remove this brace immediately." Gary stood frozen in the center of the garage. His face was ashen. His hands were shaking. "I was so sure," he whispered. "I was so sure I had it right this time." Kate turned on him, her eyes blazing with fury. "That's enough," she said, her voice cold as ice. "I'm calling my lawyer. You've hurt my daughter twice now, twice." "This ends today." She pulled out her phone and began dialing. Rose lay on the concrete floor, tears streaming down her face, pain pulsing through her body with every heartbeat. She could hear her mother's voice in the background, sharp and angry, demanding legal action. And she could see Gary. He stood alone in the middle of his garage, surrounded by his failed creations, watching everything fall apart. Rose reached out her hand. It took all the strength she had. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her body. But she reached out and her fingers found Gary's. He looked down at her in surprise. "Promise me," Rose whispered through her tears. "Promise me you won't give up." Gary's voice cracked. "Rose, I hurt you. Again. I don't know if I can." "Promise me." Rose gripped his hand tighter. "I'm not giving up. Don't you dare give up on me." Their eyes met. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding, a commitment, a shared refusal to surrender. "I promise," Gary said quietly. "I promise." That night was the darkest of Rose's life. She lay in her bed, her body aching, her mind racing, her hope hanging by the thinnest of threads. The doctors had examined her and found no permanent damage, but the psychological wound went deeper than any physical injury. Twice she had tried. Twice she had failed. Twice she had ended up on that concrete floor, bleeding and broken, and wondering if she was a fool for believing things could ever be different. Through her window, the ocean waves rolled against the shore with rhythmic indifference. Maybe her mother was right. Maybe some things could not be fixed. Maybe she was destined to spend the rest of her life in this golden cage surrounded by luxury and comfort and the constant grinding knowledge that she would never be whole. A memory surfaced. Penny, Gary's daughter, sitting on the garage floor with her crayons and her drawings. "My dad says you're really brave," Penny had told her. "He says you remind him of Uncle Ethan." Rose had smiled politely. "Is that a good thing?" Penny had nodded solemnly. Uncle Ethan never gave up. Even when he was really sick, even when everyone said there was no hope, he kept smiling. He kept trying. "That's what my dad says." She had paused, her small face serious. "Dad says that's how you know if someone is really strong, not if they never fall down, but if they keep getting up." Rose stared at the ceiling. Keep getting up. She had fallen twice now. Twice she had hit the concrete floor of that garage. Twice she had felt the shattering disappointment of hope destroyed. But she was still here. She was still breathing. She was still fighting. Rose reached for her phone and opened the video app. For hours, she watched recordings of people walking. Normal people taking normal steps, their bodies moving in ways she had almost forgotten were possible. She watched the way their weight shifted, the way their hips rotated, the way their knees bent and straightened with fluid grace. And slowly something began to form in her mind. She pulled up the videos she had taken of herself, recordings from her physical therapy sessions, from her attempts in the garage. She watched her own movement patterns, comparing them to the healthy walkers she had just observed. There was a difference, a subtle but unmistakable difference. When normal people walked, their weight shifted to their hips first. The hip led the movement and everything else followed. But in her videos, with both the original brace and Gary's prototypes, the weight shifted to her knees. The knees were carrying the load. The hips were just along for the ride. Rose sat up in bed, her heart pounding. She grabbed her notebook and began scribbling furiously. Diagrams, calculations, observations. Every insight she had gathered over the past weeks poured out of her onto the page. At 3 in the morning, she picked up her phone and typed a message to Gary. "I think I found something. Every time I walk, the weight goes to my knee first. But when normal people walk, the weight goes to the hip first. The hip leads, the knee follows. What if that's the problem? What if the center of balance is in the wrong place?" She hit send and waited. 3 minutes later, her phone rang. Rose Gary's voice was hoarse from lack of sleep. "Say that again. The center of balance. In your designs and in my original brace, the center of balance is at the knee. But what if it should be at the hip?" Silence on the other end of the line. Then Gary spoke and his voice was filled with wonder. "That's it. That's what I've been missing." "What do you mean? The hip is the natural center of gravity for human movement. When you walk, run, or even just stand, everything radiates from the hip. But every orthopedic brace on the market places the mechanical center at the knee because that's where the joint movement is most visible." He paused. "We've all been designing these things wrong. Everyone. MIT, OrthoCare, me. We've been so focused on the knee that we forgot where the body actually balances itself." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. So it's not impossible. No, Gary's voice cracked with emotion. Rose, I think you just solved the problem. It's time. Gary didn't sleep for 7 days. He scrapped both previous designs and started completely from scratch. This time, the entire architecture was built around a new principle, the center of balance at the hip. Rose came to the garage every day, not just to watch, but to participate. She measured her own body, provided feedback on every adjustment, tested each component against her own movement patterns. Gary used his entire savings, $3,000 that he had been setting aside for Penny's school tuition. He spent it on the best materials he could find: aircraft-grade aluminum alloy, medical-grade silicone, precision-engineered joints. The neighbors began to whisper. Gary's gone crazy, they said. Working all hours, never sleeping, barely eating. He's going to kill himself. But old Mrs. Patterson, who had known Gary since he was a boy, who had been at Ethan's funeral, and had watched Gary carry his grief for 15 years, she understood. That man is trying to save someone, she told the others. Leave him alone. Some things are more important than sleep. On the 7th day, Gary called Rose. It's finished. Rose arrived at the garage an hour later. Kate came too, her face drawn with worry, her hope barely visible beneath layers of fear and skepticism. Dr. Pemberton was there as well. This time he had brought a colleague, Dr. William Crawford, another orthopedic specialist, to serve as a second opinion. The garage was crowded. The air was thick with tension. Gary stood beside his workbench, holding the new brace. It looked different from anything Rose had seen before. The joints were positioned higher, closer to her hips. The overall structure seemed more integrated, more natural, as if it had been designed not to replace her body's movement, but to support it. This is it, Gary said quietly. Everything I know, everything I've learned, everything my brother taught me about never giving up. It's all in this brace. Rose looked at the device, at the hope and grief and determination that had gone into its creation. She looked at Gary, exhausted and trembling, but still standing. She looked at her mother, terrified and doubtful, but still present. And she looked at herself, scarred and broken, and twice fallen, but still fighting. Then let's find out if it works. Koem. Part 3, the miracle belongs to those who don't give up. Monson. The morning sun filtered through the cracked windows of the garage, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. Dust motes floated in the golden light like tiny prayers suspended between hope and gravity, waiting to see which way they would fall. Rose Winslow stood at the entrance, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Behind her, Kate gripped her hand with trembling fingers. Ahead of her, Gary Mercer waited beside his workbench, holding the brace that represented everything he had left to give. This was it, the final attempt, the last chance. The night before, Rose had sat with her mother in the darkness of their oceanfront mansion. Kate had been crying. She had cried so much over the past weeks that her eyes seemed permanently red, her face permanently drawn with exhaustion and fear. I can't watch you fall again, Kate whispered. I can't watch you bleed on that concrete floor and know that I let it happen. Rose took her mother's hands. Mom, look at me. Kate raised her eyes. For all these years, you've been trying to protect me from pain, from disappointment, from the world. You've built walls around me made of money and guilt and good intentions. Rose paused. But I don't need walls anymore. I need wings. Kate shook her head. What if it doesn't work? What if you get hurt again? What if this time the damage is permanent? Then at least I'll know I tried. Rose's voice was steady. At least I'll know I didn't spend my whole life hiding in a golden cage waiting for someone else to save me. She squeezed her mother's hands. You blame yourself for the accident. I know you do. I've always known. But Mom, the accident wasn't your fault. It was the ocean. It was bad luck. It was a moment that neither of us could have prevented. Tears streamed down Kate's face. But what I need you to understand, Rose continued, is that everything since then hasn't been your fault either. You did everything you could. You spent millions of dollars. You brought in the best doctors in the world. You never stopped trying. Rose leaned forward. But now I need you to let me try. Not because I'm giving up on your help, but because I've finally learned to help myself. Kate had agreed, not happily, not without reservations, but she had agreed. And now they stood together in Gary's garage, mother and daughter, bound by love and fear, and the fragile hope that this time somehow things would be different. Dr. Pemberton was there again, his face grave and professional. He had brought monitoring equipment and this time devices to track Rose's vital signs to detect any sign of distress before it became catastrophic. Dr. William Crawford stood beside him, two of California's leading orthopedic specialists watching a garage mechanic attempt what their entire profession had failed to achieve. The irony was not lost on anyone. Gary stepped forward, the brace cradled in his arms like something precious and fragile. "Rose," he said quietly, "before we begin, I need you to understand something." Rose met his eyes. "What?" "This brace is different from the others. The center of balance is completely redesigned. Everything radiates from the hip instead of the knee. It should feel more natural, but it will also feel strange at first. Your body has spent years learning to move wrong. It's going to take time to learn to move right." Rose nodded. "I understand. And one more thing." Gary's voice cracked slightly. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know that helping you has been the greatest honor of my life. You reminded me why I made a promise to my brother. You reminded me that some things are worth fighting for even when the odds seem impossible." Rose felt tears prick her eyes. "You reminded me of the same thing." Um, the old brace came off for the last time. Rose felt the familiar lightness as the metal cage was removed from her legs. For a moment, she simply sat there looking down at her limbs. They were thinner than they should have been, weakened by years of disuse. The skin was marked with scars from surgeries and accidents, and the countless small injuries that came with a life lived in metal constraints. But they were still her legs. They were still part of her. And today, one way or another, she would find out if they could still carry her forward. Gary knelt before her and began fitting the new brace. Every movement was slow and deliberate. Every buckle was tightened with careful precision. Every contact point was checked and rechecked. Rose watched his hands as they worked. Calloused hands, grease-stained hands, hands that had spent 15 years fixing machines and carrying grief, hands that were trying to give her back her life. "How does it feel?" Gary asked when the last strap was secured. Rose flexed her legs experimentally. The joints moved smoothly, more smoothly than any brace she had ever worn. The pressure was distributed evenly across her body, and she could feel the support radiating from her hips rather than concentrating at her knees. "Different," she said. "Good different." Gary stood and stepped back. "Whenever you're ready." Rose gripped the edge of the workbench. The garage had gone completely silent. Kate stood frozen in the corner, her hands pressed against her mouth. Dr. Pemberton watched his monitoring equipment with intense focus. Dr. Crawford had his phone ready to call for emergency services. Penny sat on the floor, her drawings forgotten, her young eyes fixed on the woman who had become part of her father's mission. Rose took a deep breath. She pushed herself up from the chair. The first second stretched into eternity. Rose stood on her own 2 feet, her weight balanced over her hips exactly as Gary had designed. The brace supported her without constraining her. The joints flexed naturally with her body's small adjustments. There was no pain. Rose blinked, certain she must be imagining it. For more than a decade, standing had meant pain. Immediate, unavoidable grinding pain that radiated from her lower back through her hips and down her legs. But now there was nothing. Just the feeling of her own body balanced and supported and finally at peace. "Mom." Rose's voice trembled. "I don't hurt." Kate made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh. "I don't hurt," Rose repeated, as if saying the words again would make them more real. "For the first time since the accident, I don't hurt." Gary spoke quietly. "Can you take a step?" Rose nodded. She shifted her weight to her right leg the way she had done thousands of times before. But this time the brace moved with her instead of against her. Her hip led the movement and her knee followed naturally. Her left foot lifted from the ground. It moved forward through the air. It touched down on the concrete. One step. The tears came before Rose could stop them. She had taken millions of steps in her life. Before the accident, she had run and jumped and danced without ever thinking about it. After the accident, every step had been a battle, a negotiation, a small victory won through pain and determination. But this step was different. This step was easy. This step felt like breathing. "Can you take another?" Gary asked. Rose nodded again. She shifted her weight, lifted her right foot, moved it forward, set it down. 2 steps. Another Gary's voice was barely above a whisper. 3 steps, 4 steps, 5 steps. Rose was walking, not shuffling, not hobbling, not dragging herself forward through sheer willpower. Walking. Actually walking the way she had walked when she was 8 years old before the ocean took everything away. Kate collapsed to her knees. Years of guilt and grief and desperate hope came pouring out of her in great racking sobs. She covered her face with her hands and cried like she had not cried since the night of the accident. Rose, she gasped. Oh God, Rose. But Rose wasn't finished. She kept walking. 6 steps, 7 steps, 8 steps. She reached the far wall of the garage and turned around. And then she did something she had not done since she was a child. She ran. It wasn't fast. It wasn't graceful. It was barely more than a quick shuffle, her legs moving in unfamiliar patterns, her body trying to remember movements it had forgotten long ago. But it was running. Rose Winslow was running. She ran toward her mother, her arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face. Mom, she cried. Mom, I'm running. I'm actually running. Kate scrambled to her feet just in time to catch her daughter in her arms. They stood there in the middle of the garage, mother and daughter holding each other for the first time since the accident, while both of them were standing. Not in a wheelchair, not on a hospital bed, standing. I'm sorry, Kate sobbed into her daughter's hair. I'm so sorry for everything. For the accident, for not watching, for all the years I tried to fix you with money instead of just being there. Stop, Rose whispered. Stop apologizing. You never needed to apologize. The accident wasn't your fault. None of it was your fault. She pulled back and looked into her mother's eyes. You gave me everything you had, every resource, every connection, every dollar. You never stopped fighting for me. Kate shook her head, but it wasn't enough. None of it was enough. It took a stranger in a garage to do what all my money couldn't buy. Rose smiled through her tears. That's not true. Your money brought us here. Your car broke down on that highway and we ended up at this garage. If you hadn't been driving us to another appointment, if you hadn't been trying one more time, we never would have met Gary. She paused. Everything that happened because you never gave up. And that's the only reason I'm standing here right now. Dr. Pemberton stepped forward. His face was pale. His professional composure had cracked completely. He stared at Rose as if he were seeing a ghost. This is remarkable, he said quietly. I've been treating spinal cord injuries for 30 years. I've never seen anything like this. He turned to Gary. How did you do it? Gary shrugged, looking almost embarrassed. I just listened to her body. I watched how she moved and tried to understand what she needed. The answer was there all along. Everyone was just looking in the wrong place. Dr. Pemberton shook his head slowly. The center of balance system, placing the mechanical fulcrum at the hip instead of the knee. It's so obvious now that I see it, but no one in my entire field has ever thought of it. He paused. Mr. Mercer, you may have just revolutionized orthopedic medicine. Gary didn't respond. He was looking at the photograph on his wall. The picture of Ethan young and smiling and full of life. I kept my promise, he whispered. Brother, I finally kept my promise. Penny ran across the garage and threw her arms around her father's waist. You did it, Daddy. You made the lady walk. Gary knelt down and hugged his daughter tightly. We did it together, sweetheart. All of us. Together. The days that followed were filled with wonder. Rose walked through the mansion that had been her prison for so long. She walked through the gardens, feeling the grass beneath her feet. She walked along the beach, letting the sand shift between her toes. Every step was a miracle. Every movement was a gift. She called Gary every day to report her progress. The brace was working perfectly. The pain that had plagued her for over a decade was gone. She was gaining strength, gaining confidence, gaining a sense of herself that she had lost when she was 8 years old. For the first time in her life, Rose Winslow felt free. But freedom, she would soon learn, came with a price. 2 weeks after the miracle in the garage, Gary received an official letter from OrthoCare Solutions. The envelope was thick and expensive, the kind of paper that corporations used when they wanted to intimidate. Gary opened it with trembling hands and read the contents with growing horror. Legal notice. Dear Mr. Garrett Mercer, We have been informed that you have unlawfully modified an OrthoCare Model X7 medical device without a medical or biomedical engineering license. This action violates FDA regulations governing Class 2 medical devices. We hereby demand that you immediately cease all activities related to medical devices. Failure to comply will result in civil and criminal legal action. Response deadline, 7 days. 3 days later, Vincent Calloway appeared on CNBC. He sat in a leather chair in OrthoCare's corporate headquarters, his silver hair perfectly styled, his charcoal suit immaculately pressed, his smile polished like a weapon. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the San Francisco skyline. Vincent Calloway was the CEO of OrthoCare Solutions, a Harvard MBA, a Fortune 500 executive, a man who had built his empire on the promise of cutting-edge medical technology, and a man who had just watched his company's stock price drop 3% because of a garage mechanic in San Diego. OrthoCare Solutions has always prioritized patient safety, he said smoothly, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of 1,000 investor presentations. When unlicensed individuals tamper with medical devices, they put vulnerable people at risk. We have a responsibility to protect the public. The interviewer leaned forward. But Mr. Calloway, the young woman, can walk now. Isn't that proof that Mr. Mercer's design works? Calloway's smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in his eyes. Anecdotal evidence is not scientific evidence. One lucky outcome doesn't justify reckless experimentation. We're simply asking the FDA to enforce existing regulations. He paused, letting his words sink in. Our hearts go out to Miss Winslow and her family, but we cannot allow untrained individuals to endanger patients simply because they got lucky once. The medical device industry exists for a reason. Standards exist for a reason. And OrthoCare will continue to advocate for the safety of all patients, even when that advocacy is unpopular. Rose watched the interview from her mother's office, her hands clenched into fists. Lucky outcome. More than a decade of pain. 2 failed attempts. Blood on concrete. Sleepless nights. A promise to a dead brother. And this man in his expensive suit sitting in his corner office called it luck. The news spread quickly. OrthoCare Solutions was one of the largest medical device companies in the world. Their CEO, Vincent Calloway, was known for ruthlessly protecting his company's market share. He had destroyed smaller competitors with lawsuits and regulatory complaints. He had buried innovations that threatened his products. And now he had set his sights on Gary Mercer. The California Orthopedic Association issued a statement expressing concern about unlicensed individuals modifying medical devices. Several prominent doctors spoke out about the dangers of amateur intervention in complex medical cases. Dr. Pemberton called Kate with regret in his voice. Mrs. Winslow, I want you to know that I believe in what Mr. Mercer accomplished. I saw it with my own eyes, but if I publicly support him, I'll lose my medical license. OrthoCare has powerful friends on the licensing board. Kate understood. She didn't like it, but she understood. This was how the system worked. This was how it had always worked. The powerful protected themselves, and people like Gary Mercer got crushed beneath their wheels. But Rose refused to accept it. She sat in her mother's office, reading through the legal documents, feeling anger build in her chest like a fire that had finally found oxygen. They want to destroy him, she said. They want to punish him for succeeding where they failed. Kate nodded grimly. OrthoCare's stock price dropped 3% when news of your recovery went public. Investors are asking why their $180,000 brace couldn't do what a garage mechanic accomplished for free. So this is about money. It's always about money, sweetheart. That's how the world works. Rose stood up. Then we change how the world works. Kate looked at her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. What are you planning? Rose's eyes were fierce. They want to fight, I'll give them a fight. I've spent my whole life being a victim, being a patient, being a project that other people worked on. She paused. That ends now. Dude. Rose organized a press conference. She refused her mother's offer to hire a public relations firm. She refused the suggestions of media consultants who wanted to craft her message for maximum impact. She wanted to speak in her own words from her own heart about her own experience. The event was held in the courtyard of the Winslow mansion. Dozens of reporters gathered cameras, pointed microphones ready. They had heard rumors about the billionaire's daughter who had been healed by a garage mechanic. They wanted the story. Rose would give them one. She walked out alone, no wheelchair, no cane, no assistance of any kind. Just a 19-year-old girl in a simple dress walking across the stone courtyard with steady, confident steps. The reporters fell silent. Cameras flashed. The world watched. Rose stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the sea of faces before her. My name is Rose Winslow. When I was 8 years old, I was in an accident that left me paralyzed from the chest down. She paused. For more than a decade, I lived in pain. Every step I took hurt. Every movement was a battle. I had the best medical care money could buy. I had specialists from the finest institutions in the world. I had a brace that cost $180,000, designed by engineers from MIT. Another pause. And none of it helped. None of it worked, because none of them saw me as a person. They saw me as an engineering problem, a medical case, a collection of symptoms to be managed. Rose's voice grew stronger. And then I met a man named Gary Mercer, a mechanic, a single father, a man with no medical degree and no fancy credentials. He looked at me for 15 minutes and saw what years of experts had missed. She leaned into the microphone. He saw that my brace was designed wrong. He saw that the center of balance was in the wrong place. He saw that I was in pain, not because my body was broken, but because the device that was supposed to help me was actually hurting me. The courtyard was absolutely silent. Gary Mercer spent weeks trying to help me. He failed twice. He hurt me twice. Any sane person would have given up. Any reasonable person would have walked away. Rose's eyes filled with tears. But Gary Mercer is not a reasonable person. He is a man who made a promise to his dying brother. A promise to help people who needed hope. A promise to never give up on someone who was suffering. She took a deep breath. And because he kept that promise, I am standing here today. Walking, running, living a life I thought I would never have. Rose looked directly into the cameras. Now I'm told that OrthoCare Solutions wants to sue Gary Mercer. They want to punish him for succeeding where they failed. They want to silence him because his success makes them look bad. Her voice hardened. I have a message for OrthoCare and for Vincent Calloway and for anyone else who thinks they can destroy the man who gave me back my life. She paused. You will have to go through me first, son. The video went viral within hours. Millions of views, thousands of shares, comments pouring in from people around the world who had been failed by the medical system, who had been told to accept their fate, who had been given expensive treatments that didn't work and been told to be grateful. Rose Winslow became a symbol, not of wealth or privilege, but of resistance, of hope, of the simple truth that sometimes the people who help us the most are the ones the system has overlooked. But viral videos don't stop lawsuits. OrthoCare's legal team pressed forward. They filed complaints with the FDA. They issued cease and desist orders. They threatened Gary with fines and imprisonment if he continued his work. Gary was ready to give up. Maybe they're right, he told Rose one evening in the garage. Maybe I am dangerous. I'm not a doctor. I don't have credentials. What if I got lucky with you and I hurt someone else? Rose shook her head. You didn't get lucky. You saw what nobody else could see. You understood what nobody else understood. But without a license, I can't help anyone else. Then we get you a license. Gary laughed bitterly. That would take years, decades. And I'd have to go back to school, get a degree, jump through all the hoops that the system requires. Rose smiled. Unless someone with credentials is willing to vouch for you. What do you mean I made some calls? Rose's smile widened. There's someone who wants to meet you. Her name was Dr. Eleanor Blackwood. She was a professor of biomedical engineering at Stanford University, one of the world's leading experts in orthopedic device design. Her research had been cited thousands of times. Her students had gone on to lead the field, and she had watched Rose's press conference 17 times. So, Dr. Blackwood arrived at the garage on a Tuesday morning. She was in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She didn't speak for the first 30 minutes. She simply examined the brace that Gary had built, turning it over in her hands, testing the joints, studying the design with intense concentration. Finally, she set it down and looked at Gary. You're self-taught. Yes, ma'am. No one trained you in dynamic center of balance distribution? No, I figured it out by watching how people actually move. Dr. Blackwood removed her glasses and wiped her eyes. Gary was startled to see that she was crying. Mr. Mercer, I have been in this field for 40 years. I have designed devices that are used in hospitals around the world. I have trained hundreds of engineers and doctors. She paused. And I have never seen anyone who understands the mechanics of the human body the way you do. Gary didn't know what to say. This design, Dr. Blackwood continued gesturing at the brace. It's not just good. It's revolutionary. It represents a fundamental rethinking of how orthopedic devices should be built. She met Gary's eyes. I want to help you. I want to testify before the FDA on your behalf. I want to supervise your work so that you can continue helping people legally. Why, Gary asked. Why would you risk your reputation for someone like me? Dr. Blackwood smiled. Because I became a doctor to help people. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. I got caught up in publications and patents and professional advancement. I forgot why I started this work in the first place. She gestured at Rose, who was standing in the corner of the garage with tears streaming down her face. That young woman reminded me. You reminded me. And I'll be damned if I let the system destroy someone who actually remembers what medicine is supposed to be about. The FDA hearing was held 6 weeks later. Dr. Blackwood presented a detailed analysis of Gary's design. She explained the center of balance principle. She showed data from Rose's recovery. She brought in other experts who confirmed her findings. OrthoCare's lawyers objected. They argued that Gary was unqualified, that his methods were dangerous, that allowing him to continue would set a terrible precedent. But the evidence was overwhelming. The FDA panel examined the brace themselves. They compared it to OrthoCare's design. They studied the measurements and calculations that Gary had made, and in the end, they reached a verdict. Special license. Mr. Garrett Mercer is hereby authorized to design and build orthopedic devices under the supervision of Dr. Eleanor Blackwood. This license is granted for a period of 2 years, during which Mr. Mercer will complete the requirements for official biomedical engineering certification. This decision is based on exceptional demonstrated ability in the unique circumstances of this case. Gary read the letter 3 times before he believed it was real. He had won, not because he had money or connections or power, but because he had skill, because he had determination, because he had refused to give up, because he had kept his promise to his brother. 2 years later, the Mercer Mobility Foundation opened its doors. The building was modest by medical facility standards. No gleaming towers or impressive lobbies, just a clean, well-equipped space in a working-class neighborhood of San Diego. The sign above the entrance read, Mercer Mobility Foundation, Making Hope Walk Again. And below that, in smaller letters, dedicated to Ethan Mercer, 1988-2013 hub. On opening day, dozens of families lined up outside, children in wheelchairs, adults with braces that caused them constant pain. Elderly people who had been told they would never walk again. They had heard about Rose Winslow. They had seen the videos. They had read the articles. They had come looking for hope. Gary greeted each person individually. He knelt down to meet children at eye level. He listened to adults describe their struggles. He promised nothing except that he would try. Rose was there too. She had completed her rehabilitation science degree at UC San Diego. She was now a certified physical therapy assistant, working alongside Gary to help patients adjust to their new devices. She walked through the crowd, talking to families, sharing her story, showing them living proof that miracles were possible. Because I didn't give up, she told each person she met, and because someone believed in me when no one else did. Dr. Blackwood came for the opening ceremony. She watched Gary and Rose working together, watched the hope spreading through the crowd, watched the beginning of something that would change countless lives. You know, she said to Kate, who stood beside her, your daughter is remarkable. Kate smiled. I know, not because of what happened to her, but because of what she did with it. Most people, when they're healed, they just go back to their lives. They forget what it was like to suffer. Rose chose to remember. She chose to help others. Kate nodded, tears in her eyes. She's stronger than I ever was. She learned it from you, Dr. Blackwood said. Strength isn't about never failing. It's about never giving up. 2 more years passed. The foundation helped over 300 patients. 80% of them learned to walk again or significantly improve their mobility. Gary's designs were now being studied by universities around the world. Rose became a voice for disability rights. She spoke at conferences. She testified before Congress. She appeared on national television to advocate for better treatment of people with mobility impairments. She was no longer the broken girl in the golden cage. She was a woman who had fought her way to freedom and was now helping others do the same. On a warm evening in late summer, Rose sat on the beach at Pacific Beach, the same beach where she had lost her ability to walk 15 years ago. The same waves rolled against the shore. The same sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. The same salt air filled her lungs, but everything else had changed. Kate sat beside her. Gary and Penny were there too, building a sandcastle near the water's edge. "It's beautiful," Kate said quietly. "I forgot how beautiful it is here." Rose nodded. "I used to hate this place. I couldn't even look at the ocean without feeling angry, without remembering what it took from me." And now Rose smiled. "Now I understand. The ocean didn't take anything from me. It just changed me, made me into someone different, someone stronger." She stood up. Kate looked at her with concern. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done a long time ago." "No." Rose walked toward the water. Each step was steady and confident. The brace that Gary had built supported her perfectly, moving with her body as naturally as her own bones. She reached the edge of the surf and stopped. The waves lapped at her feet. Cold Pacific water, the same water that had once nearly killed her, now gentle and welcoming. Rose took another step. The water rose to her ankles. Another step, to her knees. She stood there in the ocean, feeling the waves push and pull against her legs, feeling the sand shaft beneath her feet, feeling the salt spray on her face. And for the first time in 15 years, she was not afraid. Kate had followed her to the water's edge. Rose turned and saw her mother standing there, tears streaming down her face, hands pressed against her heart. "Mom," Rose said, "come in with me." Kate hesitated. The last time she had stood on this beach, she had been looking at her phone while her daughter nearly drowned. "Please," Rose said, "I need you with me." Kate took off her shoes and waded into the water. She reached her daughter and took her hands. They stood there together, mother and daughter, in the same ocean that had once torn them apart. "I forgive you," Rose said. "I forgave you a long time ago. But I need you to forgive yourself," Kate sobbed. "I don't know if I can." "Then let me help you." Rose pulled her mother into a hug. The waves crashed around them, but they stood firm, holding each other, finally healing the wound that had festered for so many years. Gary watched from the shore, Penny beside him. "Daddy," Penny said, "why is Miss Rose crying?" Gary smiled through his own tears. "Because she's happy, sweetheart." "Why does being happy make you cry?" "Because sometimes," Gary said, "happiness is so big that it has to come out somehow. And tears are just happiness overflowing." Penny considered this for a moment. "I think Uncle Ethan would be happy too," she said, "because you kept your promise." Gary looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Yes, sweetheart, I think he would." Later, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the four of them sat on the sand together. Rose looked at Gary. "I never thanked you properly." Gary shook his head. "You don't need to thank me. You did all the hard work." "No," Rose said. "I need to say this. You saw me when nobody else did. You believed in me when I had stopped believing in myself. You gave me hope when I had given up on hope." She paused. "You saved my life, not just by building the brace, but by showing me that miracles don't come from money or technology or expertise. They come from people who refuse to give up." Gary was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You saved me too." Rose looked at him in surprise. "I was stuck," Gary continued. "For 15 years I was stuck in grief, stuck in guilt, stuck in a promise I didn't know how to keep. You reminded me that helping one person is enough, that one miracle is enough, that keeping a promise doesn't mean saving the world. It just means never giving up." The stars came out one by one. The ocean sang its endless song, and on the beach where everything had once been lost, four people sat in silence, bound together by pain and hope, and the simple, profound truth that had brought them through the darkness. Miracles don't come from money. Miracles come from hands that never stop working, hearts that never stop believing, and people who never ever give up. Rose looked out at the ocean one last time. Thank you, she whispered, for what Kate asked, for everything, for the accident that changed my life, for all those years of struggle that made me strong, for the failure and the pain and the fear, for every single moment that led me here. She smiled, because without all of that, I wouldn't be who I am today. I wouldn't have met Gary. I wouldn't have learned to fight. I wouldn't have discovered that the only cage that truly imprisons us is the one we build ourselves. She stood up and offered her hand to her mother. Let's go home. They walked back across the sand together, leaving footprints that the tide would soon wash away. But the miracle they had created would last forever. In the 300 patients who could now walk because of Gary's designs, in the thousands of people who had been inspired by Rose's story, in the promise that had finally been kept, and in the simple, unshakable truth that Rose would carry with her for the rest of her life. Hope is not something you find. Hope is something you build, one step at a time. If this story touched your heart, remember that miracles like this happen every day. Not in mansions or laboratories, but in ordinary places created by ordinary people who refuse to give up. And if you're struggling right now, if you're in pain, if you've been told to accept your fate, know this, your miracle is still out there. Keep walking, keep fighting, keep hoping, because the only way to truly lose is to give up, and you are stronger than you know.